Hey everyone, welcome back to our Profiles in Faith. Before we begin, um, I want to remind you all of the survey that I just linked to the comments with this video. That survey is going to remain in place throughout this week as I try to seek your input on the form and the function of these videos as we slowly progress to the new normal in the weeks ahead. For clarity, I want to make sure that I say that I want input from everyone who's watching. I want to know everybody that's out there, members and non-members, near and far. I want to hear from all of you. So if you haven't yet completed that survey, please do so, as I want your input as we decide what role these may have in the weeks and months moving forward. As for now, we continue today into the ministry of Jesus. Given the gospel focus on the life and ministry of Jesus, some of our characters will be lesser known than those grand heroes of faith on whom we focused in the Old Testament. The grand hero of the Gospels is Jesus, so it all reads a bit differently, but still, the stories of these people with Jesus, of course, can speak so richly to our hearts and lives today. So we're going to spend this week and next in the Gospels. For the most part, we're going to spend the time in the Gospel according to Luke. And then on May 11th, we'll turn our attention to the early church as we kind of round out this series as we come through the month of May. For today, I want to spend a little time with the Roman Centurion who appears in Luke 7. And I ask that you bear with me a little bit as today's reflection's a little bit longer than the ones that we've had to date. But this comes from Luke 7, the first 10 verses. It tells us that after Jesus had finished all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. A centurion there had a slave whom he valued highly and who was ill and close to death. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders to him, asking him to come and heal his slave. And when they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "He's worthy of having you do this for him. He loves our people, and it is he who built our synagogue for us." Jesus went with them, but when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore, I did not presume to come to you. But only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd that followed him, he said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith." When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health. There are so many kind of subtle dynamics at play in this passage. A centurion was an official of the Roman army, specifically one who had charge over 100 soldiers. Centurion, that's the connection. And so this was a Gentile, a non-Jew. Now, there were Gentile proselytes at the time who had some relationship with those of the Jewish faith. Some were friends, others were God-fearing. In other words, there were some non-Jews who had some level of relationship and faith in God, but they weren't able to be circumcised. They couldn't formally convert, and they remained outsiders to the Jewish community. A Jewish person, in fact, would be deemed unclean if they set foot in the house of a Gentile. even if that person was a friend as a help, or a help, as is this centurion. So that's the context of this request. Jesus makes his way into Capernaum. This centurion hears that Jesus is near and sends word to Jesus seeking help. The manner in which he does it, however, the confidence that this centurion displays in his words are remarkable. Knowing that Jesus shouldn't, according to Jewish law, even be under his roof, but so confident in what Jesus can do, this centurion sends word asking Jesus to simply speak the healing of this man from afar. Because he's that confident of the love and power of God that Jesus can bring into his trials. You see, what stood out to me in reading this story, particularly in the context of our current days, is that this centurion knows three things. He knows that he has a problem that he can't resolve on his own. He knows that Jesus can enter into that problem with the unimaginable power and love of God, and he knows that this problem matters to Jesus. That it mattered to God. The more I thought about this story, the more my heart settled on that third piece. Remember, Jesus saw himself as a Jew. The distinction between Judaism and Christianity that we know today was not part of Jesus' worldview. He was ministering, teaching, and leading from the confines of the Jewish tradition, the Jewish expectation, and the Jewish understanding of faith. He saw himself as the fulfillment of the Jewish promises, not a departure from it. That's important because here we have a centurion, a Roman, a man with no history or place in the Jewish tradition, coming to Jesus, a teacher within that Jewish tradition, with profound confidence that his problem would matter to Jesus, that it would matter to God. The reality is that I think we spend a lot of time talking about the first two of the 3 points of knowledge that I highlighted in the centurion. I think we regularly address the fact that we frequently confront needs that we can't handle on our own, and that Jesus can enter into those needs with the unimaginable power and love of God. I think those are common themes for us in the life of the church, and they've certainly been themes within this series in the weeks past. But I think we sometimes get caught up on that final step. I think we sometimes emerge from our dialogues and assurances of the wonder and the power of God's love only to look upon our needs and question whether or not they will or should matter to God. We start comparing our problems to those of others. We start looking at the relative struggle we face as compared to those whom we see as having it worse. We start delving into the false comfort of trying to rest in the truth that our problems aren't as bad as those who are much less fortunate. And in the end, we decide that our problems aren't worth God's time, that we don't want to bother God with our needs, and that so many have it worse off than we, and thus we just need to suck it up and grind on because we're lucky to be where we are. And for many of us, it couldn't be more true. Many, if not most of us, are not spending our days fretting over how we're going to pay the rent or put food on the table. Many of us aren't facing the daily shortfalls and the lack of security with which others are dealing in the midst of this pandemic. Many of us are, without a doubt, remarkably lucky to be where we are. That is a blessing. And it's a blessing of which to be aware and for which we ought to be tremendously grateful. But none of that means that our pain isn't real. It doesn't mean that our hurt isn't genuine. No, we may not strain about how to get through tomorrow, and that's a blessing, but that doesn't mean that our graduating senior or dedicated athlete or isolated parent or isn't grieving over the blessings, opportunities, and experiences that have been lost in weeks past and weeks future. Look at this story of a Roman official utterly confident that God would care for him. Look at the recurrent gospel stories of those reaching out to Jesus for help. Look at the fact that every time someone tried to claim that one's needs or pains weren't worth Jesus' time, Jesus stepped in and said, "Oh, yes, they are." Our problems matter to God. It's not a relative equation. There's not a baseline of sorrow we need to meet in order to be worth God's time. God doesn't compare our needs to those of others to decide if we deserve the imbuing of his love into our lives. Our hurts, our pains, our needs, they matter to us, and for that reason, they matter to God. It really, truly is that simple. Let's be in prayer together. God of ceaseless care and limitless love, help us to find the faith-filled confidence of that centurion. Help us, God, to have the wisdom to see the needs and the pains that weigh on our hearts. Help us to have the faith to stand in confidence in the power and love that you can breathe into those needs. And then help us, God, to embrace the wonder of your limitless care, that we might too be assured that our pains, no matter what they may be, matter to you and are forever worthy of your care. In his name, amen. Thank you all, as always, for joining me. Blessings upon you, and I will see you here tomorrow.